Amen. Thank you. Good evening. And thank you for coming again tonight. Last week, Sunday evening, I talked about why I believe in Genesis as history and a young earth. And while I was on a roll with controversial topics, I decided just to hit another one. So tonight we're going to talk about evolution in the Bible. Evolution in the Bible. But before we do that, let's pray. Lord, thank you for your love for us through Jesus Christ. And Lord, tonight we think about another issue, Lord, that is worth dwelling on. And I just pray tonight, Lord, that we would be guided by your Spirit in all truth, that we would be willing to believe whatever you say, but above all, Lord, to think critically and to think clearly, Lord. We Christians, Lord, we exercise faith, but that faith is not blind faith. It's not a leap in the dark, Lord. It is a confident trust in your faithfulness, Lord, as a sovereign, omnipotent God who has created the world with order and specificity. And I pray, oh Lord, that we would just learn to use our minds, Lord, for your glory. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So again, as I've mentioned, I'm talking tonight about evolution in the Bible. Why is this issue important? Well, it's important. It's important for us to learn to think about for several reasons. One is that basically evolution today is basically taught as an undisputed fact. I think I mentioned that last time. Kind of on par with gravity. And I mentioned, it's kind of an absurd claim because we can observe gravity, but by definition, we cannot observe evolution. And it's also important to think about this question is because ideas have consequences. That is, apologist Ravi Zacharias has said that there's 4 things that constitute a worldview, the way we look at the world: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. That is, where did we come from, our origins, why are we here, our meaning, morality, what is right and wrong, and then destiny, what happens to us after we die. What you believe about those 4 things basically tells me how you believe the world works, what approach you're taking to view the world. But the thing is that they're all interconnected, and they're all interconnected. So what you believe about one will necessarily affect the other. For example, in morality, for origins and morality, for example, if I believe that we're just cosmic accidents, a chance evolution of chemical processes, well, that necessarily affects what you believe about morality. Because if that's just how we got here by sheer chance, as many people do, then that means that our life really has no meaning. It's just made up. It's just a figment of our imaginations. And that there's really no such thing as morality because we're just animals, And so if tigers eat other, things, let's kill and eat and have, let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And that means, and it also means that when we die, we'll go to nothing, for nothing, and then the world will go on like we never existed. And so you see, all the things are interconnected. And so what that means is that ideas have consequences. And what you believe in one area necessarily, if you're consistent, will affect what you believe about other areas. And so it's important that we think clearly, because some people don't care about consistency in their thought. Some people would say, well, I can believe this in one area and I can believe this in another part of my life, and the two really don't make sense together, but that's just what I'm going to believe. Well, that's fine, but God calls us to greater intellectual integrity than that. So if some people want to be consistent, that's fine, but they're not having integrity in they're not having intellectual honesty. And so we want to think clearly and thoughtfully about these things as well as we can, and consistently as we can with Scripture. Okay, so what am I going to be talking about tonight? The first thing I'm going to mention is that I want to talk about is, what do I mean by evolution? What do I mean by evolution? Okay, I just want to be clear when I'm talking tonight that I'm not talking about microevolution, but about macroevolution. So there's a difference. So, and I don't know how familiar you are with these things, but in microevolution, we see what Charles Darwin proposed with his finches. So if you remember, Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, and he saw finches. I think they discovered later they're not really finches, but something else. But he called them finches. But they had different kinds of beaks, okay? And he later postulated that certain type of beak gave a certain type of finch an advantage in certain types of climates and certain types of environmental circumstances, right? So the weather changes, there's not a lot of rain, there's only seeds that have very hard nuts there. So now only the birds that have the bigger, stronger beaks will be able to survive and pass on their genes to following generations of finches. And so he proposed that that by this mechanism, it weeds out certain types of finches with certain kinds of beaks and only allows finches with the bigger beaks to live. In other words, nature, it's called natural selection. Nature selected the big beak birds, okay, and didn't select the other ones and weeded them out. But what's important to note about microevolution in this way is that what it does is it specializes a certain type of creature. So what it did is it specialized the finch so that it weeded out certain kinds of finches, and it specialized it to have only a certain type of beak rather than having the possibility of having many different kinds of beaks. Okay? But it's important to note here that it didn't become something other than a finch. Okay? So it specialized its features, but it didn't change it into something different than a finch. It was still a finch. And so this is what's called microevolution or speciation. That is, because of external factors, a certain population may be pushed towards to have certain type of features that may isolate it from a bigger population. Okay, and where this population over here becomes so specialized in certain features that it won't even reproduce with this other population over here. And when they become reproductively isolated, we call it a new species, and a new species is born. So it sounds like we're talking about evolution because a new species is created, but technically it's not really. It's a new species of finch. Does that make sense? And so hopefully that's clear. So that's microevolution. Macroevolution is something different, and you have to understand the difference because macroevolution is, unlike microevolution, it's unobservable, and it's a postulation. It's an extrapolation from microevolution that says that if this population can become specialized in this feature, then what if over millions of years the specialization in the natural forces on this population slowly changes it to a completely different type of animal altogether? Okay, that's macroevolution. Okay, and that it's fundamentally different than microevolution. What if changes in these animal populations gradually accrue into more and more complex features, changing the population into actually a totally different animal altogether? And that's what macroevolution postulates. Okay, but by definition, it can't be observed because it would take millions of years. Okay, but just to be clear, I'm just going to say evolution in the rest of this message, but just to be clear, when I say evolution, I'm talking about macro and not microevolution. Okay, number 2, question I want to look at is this. Are evolution in the Bible compatible? Are evolution in the Bible compatible? There is a growing number of Christians today who feel so compelled by the scientific evidence for evolution that they're working very hard to reconcile the Bible and evolution. In fact, there's a whole organization called Biologos which strongly advocates for what they call theistic evolution. That is evolution that they claim was guided by God. And so I'm not going to go into all the details, but you just should know that that's out there. My question, so I just want to ask myself, when I look at the Bible, what do I see? And do I see the two as compatible? And I'm going to make a case, and you can decide if it's compelling or not. So last week, if you were here, I made a case for a biblical young earth, and I argued that there are enough biblical pointers to lend weight to the concept of a young earth and enough biblical and theological problems that holding an old earth can give us that I feel like holding a young earth position is more faithful to the biblical text. And so, of course, if the conclusions I drew there are correct, that would, by definition, exclude macroevolution because of the time frame it requires. Okay? But in addition to that, let me make this line of argumentation with you, and you decide what you think. Okay? Again, many people say that Genesis 1 is like poetry, or they call it exalted prose, or like a creation narrative. It's not really meant to be taken literally per se. And I agree with people, and I totally agree with people who would say that the Bible is not a scientific textbook. That's absolutely right. It's not a scientific textbook. But I will say this about the Bible. Wherever the Bible does speak about historical things in a historical way, that's clearly intending to show that it was meant to be an accurate account of historical events, then we should believe it. In other words, the Bible is not a scientific textbook, but wherever it speaks authoritatively, it's true. That's what I'm saying. That's my presupposition. And so so the Bible certainly is not concerned with minute details of things, but wherever it does speak, I believe we as Christians are obligated to believe it. Okay? And the problem that I see with evolution in the Bible specifically deals around Genesis 2 and the special creation of Adam. The special creation of Adam. So I argued again last week that I believe that to be faithful to the biblical text as a Christian, I don't see how you cannot believe in a literal historical Adam. The reason for that is because Jesus clearly believed that Adam was an actual man who actually lived and not a mythological figure. And I gave another reason for that, and that is in Luke's genealogy of Jesus, he traces the genealogical line of Jesus from Jesus all the way back to Adam. And so he goes through all kinds of people that we will all agree on are actual historical people. David, okay, Abraham, Judah, okay. He goes through all those people, but then he doesn't stop there. He keeps going to Noah, all the way back to Adam. So I think to be faithful to the biblical text, I just don't see how you can not believe in an actual, literal Adam. Because of this, some people, and including a well-known scholar who is otherwise very conservative, actually have suggested that Adam and Eve were perhaps two advanced hominids. That is, they were two highly evolved apes that God just decided to stamp the divine image on top of them and make them human. Okay? And so some have suggested that. Some Christians have suggested that. Because, again, they feel so compelled by the scientific evidence to believe that evolution is true, that God raised up Adam and Eve through evolution per se, but they weren't really human beings, but then they became so highly advanced, then God made them human by stamping the divine image upon them, if you will. Okay, but here's the problem that I see with trying to reconcile evolution with the Genesis 2 account of Adam. And that is that evolution is going to require you to allegorize the whole account. And here's what I mean. In Genesis 2, it talks about the special creation of Adam. And how does it say that God created Adam? From the dust, right? From the dust. And what else does it say specifically? And this is particularly challenging, I think, for evolution. How does it say God created woman? From the man, right? He took the woman literally from the man. That's what the text says. Okay, so it's hard to conceive how you can construe that on an evolutionary framework to say that God took woman from man and make that consistent, took woman out of man and make that consistent with evolution. I don't see how you can do that. And then here's the real problem with that, is if you choose to allegorize that and you say, well, that's not meant to be taken literally. He wasn't literally taken from the dust. Woman wasn't literally taken from the man. It's just kind of an allegory. Okay, and some people do that. Here's my problem with that. And that is this. If you allegorize that, where do you stop? So if man wasn't really taken from the dust, if woman wasn't really taken from man's side, then did they really eat the fruit? did they really give birth to Cain and Abel? Because when you read the story, there's no marker saying one's a story and one's real. There's no marker. It just keeps on reading like it's all the same story, right? So if you allegorize the part about God taking woman out of man and say, well, that's just a story, the question is, where do you stop allegorizing? Did they really eat the fruit? Did they really talk to a snake? Were they really kicked out of the garden? Did they really have Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel as children? That's what the question becomes. And here's an undeniable fact. Just like I said that Jesus believed Adam and Eve were literal people, Jesus, not just literal people, but Jesus believed that what happened in the early chapters of Genesis was actual history. And we know this from Matthew chapter 23, verse 34 and 35. Jesus says, "Therefore I'll send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, some of whom you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar." So think about what this is saying. No one would dispute the murder of Zechariah as history, right? Because it's not even in Genesis. Okay, it's not even in Genesis. It's like in Chronicles. I think it's in Chronicles, Kings and Chronicles. So it's not even in Genesis. But Jesus puts Abel, the history of Abel, on the same historical level as the murder of Zechariah, right? He considers them both the same level of historical accuracy, right? It's clear. He makes them parallel in his statement. That means that Jesus clearly believed that the murder of Abel was an actual historical event. And so so what I'm saying is that if Jesus believed that the murder of Abel was an actual historical event, then how can you say that the other events in Genesis 2 were not? I think that's a serious problem. I really do. I think it's a serious problem with trying to reconcile evolution with the biblical teaching. I think if Jesus believed that Abel was really killed by Cain, then I think he also believed that Adam and Eve really ate the fruit. And that Adam and Eve really were made from the dust, and that Eve was really made out of man. And I just don't see how you can see it otherwise. Another pointer towards this is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 8. And that is, Paul says this. He says, "For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man." In other words, so this is just another example. Paul is talking about the wearing of head coverings, which that's another sermon. but he is arguing from the order of creation that we should behave in a certain way today. Okay? So it's hard to see how that argument could be powerful if he didn't understand that it actually happened, that woman really was literally made from man. And there's no pointer in the context that would tell us otherwise, that he didn't believe that it was a literal event. And so I think that's the biggest problem with trying to reconcile evolution with the Bible. Because if humanity evolved, then in what sense could we say that man was created from the dust, that woman was taken out of man, and then on what basis would we have not to then allegorize the whole historical account of Adam and Eve? And that's a serious problem, considering that Jesus clearly believed in a literal Adam and Eve, and that the murder of Abel was an actual historical event. Okay, so that's the biblical case. You can think about it and wrestle with it. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about tonight is some problems with evolution. Scientific problems with evolution. You may or may not be surprised to know that a minority, for sure, but a growing minority of scientists, and many of whom are not Christians, and some of whom are not even religious, see serious problems with the theory of evolution. They do. I mean, they don't necessarily have an agenda. They just see serious problems with it, and I'm going to share with you some of those problems. Okay, the first problem with evolution is this: where does the new genetic information come from? Where does the new genetic information come from. So earlier I explained Darwin's theory about the finches and the process of natural selection. But you have to... But think about how natural selection works, okay? Because we understand it. We understand it from just personal experience, and I'll explain how. But think about it. Let's say you have a population. We'll just say finches that have different characteristics, right? And when they interbreed, all right, depending on the characteristics of the mother and the father, that child will have different probabilities of having certain characteristics, right? Okay. Well, so what that means is that in a population of animals, you have what they call a gene pool. You have the possibilities of many different kinds of traits being shown in that population, right? And even for us, when we, if my dad has blue eyes and my wife, she has blue eyes in her family, it is possible then that we could have a blue-eyed child. But it's unlikely, though. Why? Because it's a recessive trait, right? Other traits will dominate that trait. But that means, but it also means that we carry that gene. It's in there. It's just you don't see it, right? That means subsequent generations, if Finn marries a blue-eyed woman, it's possible then that they could have blue-eyed kids, right? Because the gene he carries that gene. Okay? Well, what does natural selection do? Well, natural selection weeds out genes that produce traits that are not helpful for the environment, right? It weeds out genes. So if you have a population that can produce many different kinds of genes, but all the population of birds with genes for small beaks die, then what are you left with? You're left with a population of nothing but birds with big beaks. And what does that mean? It means that all subsequent generations will have what kind of beak? A big beak. What does that mean? It means the population has not gained genetic information. They've lost genetic information. Because now, no matter how many times you breed those birds, you're not going to get a small beaked bird. Why? Because the genes do no longer exist in the gene pool. You see? So natural selection does not increase genetic information. It actually decreases genetic information because it weeds out genes that are not helpful in an environment. And so why is that a problem for evolution? Because evolution requires not just a certain trait becoming more prominent among a population. Evolution requires genetic information being added so that features become more complex, right? And it means that features have to become more complex. That means more information has to be added to the gene pool, not taken away. Okay? And so the question is, so natural selection is not a mechanism for macroevolution. It's a mechanism for microevolution or speciation, which is a specialization of a feature. But it does not add genetic information, and therefore it cannot create more complex features. Okay? So that's important to note. Natural selection is not a mechanism for macroevolution. Okay? So how then does the genetic information increase? Really, the only mechanism that I know of that some have suggested, and that even seems possibly reasonable to me, is the mechanism of what's called random mutation. Is the mechanism of random mutation. And that is, you have your DNA, okay? And your DNA dictates what kind of proteins are produced by the cell, all right? And ultimately what your features will be, okay? Sometimes what happens is there can be things what's called copying errors. For example, when the DNA is copied and taken to another place of the cell to build the protein, sometimes there's a copying error where it doesn't get the order right, and it puts a mistake in there, puts a mistake in the DNA. Okay, in reproduction, when you reproduce, sometimes that happens too. Okay, so there's other ways mutations can happen, like radiation and stuff like that, where a change in your actual DNA, your change in your genome actually happens. Okay, so that could potentially add genetic information. Here's the problem with random mutation. Okay, Let me just give you this one example. Studies in this particular breed of fly, like a fly that buzzes around, okay, they studied on it, and this is what they discovered. If a mutation changes a protein that's produced by a gene, this will probably be harmful, with about 70% of mutations having damaging effects and the remainder being neutral or weakly beneficial. What does that mean? It means that when you begin to tinker with genes and touring around, it almost always is harmful, not helpful, right? You've heard of genetic diseases, right? What are those a result of? It's a result of an error in the gene, and almost always errors in the genes, mutations, almost always are not helpful. They are hurtful. Okay? Let me give you another comment that a scientist made. And now the scientist is the scientist who made this comment is the president of BioLogos. So he is a Christian, but he's a Christian that is very supportive of evolution, and he actually argues against Christians who are against evolution. He argues against them because he's for evolution. But this is what he says. He says, today's gene regulatory systems today's gene regulatory networks are almost are resistant to mutational perturbation. That is, in other words, they seem to be almost impossible to change through genetic mutation because virtually all such alterations are lethal. So here's a scientist who is for evolution, and he is openly acknowledging that it seems almost impossible to posit genetic mutation as a mechanism for adding genetic information because almost all genetic mutations are lethal. Okay? So I want you to think about genetic mutation, because remember, genetic mutation would be random, right? So imagine I have a computer code, and then I begin randomly changing that computer code. What are the odds, do you think, that I would improve that code by making random changes? What do you think? Even if you gave me millions of years of making small random changes in a computer code, do you think I would one day write software that could run Windows 10 by making random changes in a code over millions of years? No, it doesn't make sense. So to me, to posit random mutation as something that adds genetic information doesn't make sense, okay? The next problem with evolution is problems with the fossil record. It's problems with the fossil record. You can look in any science textbook and it'll tell you about what's called the Precambrian explosion. Okay? In the Precambrian explosion, basically why they call it the Precambrian explosion is because in the time period immediately prior to what they call the Cambrian time period, there was an explosion of body forms. Okay? In other words, rather than what we would expect by evolution, that is the slow minute changes that slowly diverge in different kinds of animals, what you have in the Precambrian explosion is almost an immediate explosion in the fossil record of many diverse types of body forms and fossil types. Okay? In fact, I've heard it said before that some scientists have said that the biggest problem with evolution is the fossil record, which is a great irony if you think about it. Given the Precambrian explosion, how can you explain on an evolutionary basis how all these different body forms did not slowly diverge, but almost all appear simultaneously in the fossil record? How do you explain that? And also, there's another problem, too, that the fossil record shows, and that is, in the fossil record, species almost always enter and exit the fossil record in the same form. That is, we can see a fossil of the T-Rex, and then, supposedly millions of years later, whatever you believe about that, the latest dinosaur fossil that we have, it looks the same as the first one. And this is true generally across the entire realm of the fossil record. Now, of course, there are fossils which they claim to be transitional species, but I want you to think about this, about how significant this problem is. The problem with the fossil record is so significant that an atheistic and rather famous, actually, paleontologist, Stephen Jay Gould, who's of Harvard, actually developed this theory called the theory of punctuated equilibrium. punctuated, meaning at a point in time. He developed the theory, and he's not religious at all, but he developed the theory of punctuated equilibrium to just try to deal with this problem. And his theory was basically that evolution happens in short spurts, that it just kind of happens real quick, and before you know it, before it can be recorded in the fossil record, you have a new type of animal. But of course, that goes against the whole basis of evolution, which is that it takes slow, gradual changes. And yet, this atheistic paleontologist actually developed this theory. Why? Because he recognized the problem that the fossil record has for the traditional theory of evolution. That's how significant of a problem it is. And as I said, there are fossils which scientists claim are transitional species, and some are more compelling than others. You have to do your research on that. But here's the thing. This is a question that I think hasn't been answered. If evolution is the way that all species came about, then transitional fossils, that is, fossils that show us, something that's halfway in between one type of animal and another, right? That type of species, that type of fossil, that type of evidence should be the norm in the fossil record, right? If that's the way everything evolved, then the whole fossil record should be what? Full of transitional species. We should be able to trace clearly in the fossil record something changing from this, changing to this, changing from this. And what we see in the fossil record is it's not there. It's not there. We shouldn't just be finding a few quote-unquote transitional species here and there. And scientists are claiming, we just need more time to find them. But the thing is, it should be the norm. There should be fossils everywhere showing transitional species. If that is the way everything evolved and it took so long to do it, they should be everywhere. In fact, this is what Charles Darwin said. Charles Darwin, who developed the theory of evolution by natural selection, said, he says this: firstly, why, if species descended from others by insensibly fine gradations, why do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why is not all nature in confusion instead of the species being as we see them well defined? Why is that? Think about it. If evolution is the norm, there is no reason why we should not find alive today alive animals that show how something changed to something else. But we don't. We see species that are basically distinct in their kinds today. Okay? So, the fossil record. The next problem with evolution, and that is the problem of irreducible complexity. The problem of irreducible complexity. I want to show you this picture of the bacterial flagellum. Can you show that? Okay. Some mechanical guy, tell me what that looks like. What does that look like? Looks like a motor, doesn't it? You know why? Because it is. It's a biomolecular motor. Okay, look at it. It has all these different minute working parts, okay, that do what? That allow the cell to swim through the water, right? Okay, why is this significant? It's significant because of this. Evolution demands what? It demands a very slow accrual of genetic information and features that each accrual must offer a visible advantage for it to be passed on to the next generation, right? Evolution cannot explain the bacterial flagellum. Why? Because when you have one piece of a motor, what do you have? You don't have anything. When you have two pieces of a motor, what do you have? You don't have anything. Two pieces of a motor do not add any advantage. And therefore, in terms of natural selection, they do not offer any means that would push them forward into the next generation, right? You only have an advantage with the bacterial flagellum when all the parts are together at the same time, right? In other words, how is it feasible that could develop slowly over time? How could a motor develop slowly over time and offer advantage in every step of the way? It can't. It only offers an advantage when it is fully formed and in place, and then you can swim. Right? You see? This is what Charles Darwin said. Darwin, he said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. That's what Charles Darwin said. There are cells that have outboard motors in them, folks. How does that happen by accident? By chance. Okay. The next problem with evolution is the existence of specified complexity. Namely DNA. Can you show that picture of the... There you go. One of the greatest scientific discoveries in the 20th century, incredible discovery, was the discovery of the structure, the double helix structure of DNA. Okay? DNA is composed of two strands, okay, that are connected in many places by bars, if you will, of nucleotide bases, okay? Nucleotide bases. And they pair up. So in the picture there, you see you have four different kinds of nucleotide bases. A, T, C, and G for short, okay? A always pairs with T, C always pairs with G, okay? And so in the double helix strand, the two pairs are in the middle and they pair up, okay? And they form a bar that connects the two strands, okay? Well, what they discovered and what Watson and Crick discovered when they were trying to discover the structure of DNA was that the four different bases that can go inside DNA, there is no chemical or physical, that is on the basis of physical science. There's no chemical or physical scientific reason for the bases to go in a specific order along the strand. Okay? What does that mean? That means that the bases in the strand can go in any order. A, C, T, G can go in any order, in any pattern, in any structure whatsoever along the whole length of the strand. What does that allow it to do then? What it allows it to do is that the order of those letters, if you will, and that's what we should think of it as letters, okay? Those bases represent a letter, if you will, okay, in your genetic code. And there's no law or physical property that causes them to go in a certain order, okay? That means there's nothing that demands them to be the way that they are. But get this, they're in a specific order that tells the other parts of your cell how to build proteins, okay? So those bases in your DNA, what do? They contain genetic information, okay? The order in which those bases appear in your DNA are like letters in an alphabet, okay? And they can appear in any specific order, and the order in which they go in tells the other parts of the cell which amino acid to chain together to build a protein. And that's what I want to talk about next. Because you kind of have to understand this to feel the full force of it. Your DNA is like a blueprint or like a binary code that tells the cell how to make proteins. Now, what's the deal with proteins? Proteins are a string of amino acids, okay? So just think of a string put together by a bunch of blocks, okay? When you string amino acids together, okay, if you string a bunch of random amino acids together, you do not get proteins, okay? It's only when you string certain types of amino acids together in a certain order to form a certain length do you get a functional protein that actually can serve a function in your cell. What's the point? The point is this. The information in the DNA has to be specific to match with the way proteins actually work in order for it to build the protein in a right way in order that the cell will function properly and build the right proteins. So what does that mean? It means this. It means that in the analogy, and it's a one-to-one analogy, in the analogy, the order of the bases in your DNA are like letters. The bases in your DNA are like letters, and the proteins and the structure of the proteins is like your vocabulary and your grammar, right? If you just put a bunch of random letters together, you do not get words, right? Because it doesn't match the vocabulary and the grammar, right? It has to match. If you string a bunch of nucleotide bases together, which strings random amino acids together, you don't get functional proteins. They don't work, and they serve no function and can be harmful to the cell. Okay? So, in other words, in this analogy, the nucleotide bases are like letters, and the structure of proteins is like the vocabulary and the grammar. What does this mean? It means in the DNA, we have information with specified complexity. And can you show up that next slide? Okay, so in this world, there's different kinds of information. There's what's called order, all right? We see order in nature. ABC, ABC, ABC. It's a repetitive order. Nature creates that kind of order on its own. Take the crystalline structure of salt, for example, okay? All right, any type of crystalline structure has a regular pattern of atoms. It regularly repeats itself. It's called order. That is found in nature, okay? The next type of information is called complex information, but it's mere complexity. That is, it's random. Take a bunch of random letters, all right? It's complex. It doesn't follow an order, but it also contains no information. It also contains no functional information, okay? It serves no purpose, right? Just like if you string a bunch of amino acids together, it would just be like random letters strung together. It would serve no purpose, okay? Nature creates mere complexity. Nature creates mere complexity. You can see that in just random things that happen in the world, okay? But the next type of information is what's called information with specified complexity. Time and tide wait for no man. In other words, it's not in order. It's not ABC, ABC, nor is it random. It's complex, but it's also specific in that it conveys functional information. Time and tide wait for no man, okay? If you went to the beach and saw "I love mom" written in the sand, you would be foolish to conclude, man, look how this random chance of events occurred that wrote this in the sand. You wouldn't say that. You would say what? Someone wrote it, right? Why? Because in nature, we observe that specifically complex information only comes from intelligence. The only place that we know of that can develop specific, complex information is intelligence. At the inside the nucleus of every cell is specifically complex information. And I would say, and the only thing we know that can do that is intelligence. And this is what's commonly called the intelligent design argument. And if you're interested in what I've been discussing just now, I encourage you to read. It's a lengthy book, but it's called Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer. And it explains all this in much greater detail. But I just want you to think about this. Inside our bodies is language. Inside our bodies is specific information, like a code, it's in fact they call it the genetic code. But who can create code? Not nature. Only intelligence can create code. Evolution cannot account for this. Okay. So, some final concerns with evolution, and then we'll close out tonight. So, the final thing is the moral and philosophical issues when it comes to evolution. The moral and philosophical issues are this. If evolution is the primary mechanism by which God ordered things to be, assuming we believe in, for someone who believes in theistic evolution, for example, what we're saying is that God designed the world to work on the basis of natural selection. Okay? So if I want to say, well, God designed evolution, if I want to say that, what am I saying? I'm saying God designed the world to work in a system in which the way things are ordered to be is survival of the fittest. because that's what natural selection is. It is survival of the fittest, okay? Well, if a theistic evolutionist, what they are saying is that God designed things to work by evolution, okay? And that was good, because remember, God said everything he created was good. They're saying that God designed evolution and that it was good. And that before sin came into the world, because obviously they're saying that man entered the world to much later time frame in history. So what they're saying is that the good world God created before sin entered into the world was a world of natural selection, survival of the fittest, dog eat dog, may the strongest survive. I just think to say that God designed the natural order to work according to survival of the fittest and that it was good, I see that hard to reconcile with the Christian doctrine of supporting, helping, upholding, and protecting the weak. And yet you would have to believe that, and you'd have to say that it was good because it came before the fall. Okay? And another issue with that is that if that is a principle built into nature, then what would prevent us, built into nature by God, then what would prevent us from working that principle into our societies? Right? If God designed the world to work in terms of survival of the fittest, and if it was good, right, because it happened before the fall, right, and that's a principle God designed the natural order to work, what would keep us from working that principle into our human societies? What would keep us from doing that? And you know people have tried that? Hitler. The superhuman Aryan race. How do you get rid of it? Well, easy. You do what nature does. You kill off the weaker races. Right? That's what Hitler believed. Why not? If evolution is true, why not? Because it's the natural order of things. You see? And a side note on that is the abortion movement in America was a spinoff of the eugenics movement. You know what eugenics is? It's population control based off of the founder of Planned Parenthood was a proponent of eugenics, and she supported the sterilization of lesser races so that they wouldn't breed and multiply. Why not? If evolution's a good thing and survival of the fittest is best. Okay? And the final concern with evolution is this. Is that we have to remember that that nobody is neutral. You know, secular world, they kind of have this presupposition that we're neutral and religious people are biased. And it's just false. It's just not true. Everybody is biased. Everybody has presuppositions about the way the world works. And the presuppositions that you have are unproven, and they influence how you interpret the evidence. And we would be foolish not to think that the reason why, and Charles Darwin acknowledged this because he became less and less religious as a result of his own theory. And as it promulgated, people clearly understood the implications of his theory. And that is that if natural selection is true, there is a mechanism for design, for complex features. There's a mechanism for complexity, which I argued that it wasn't, but they believed that it was a mechanism for complex features, a mechanism for the explanation of the appearance of design without a designer. And many people, I believe the reason why evolution is held to so religiously today, and it is because it gives them what they perceive as a strong scientific basis for their atheism. That is, it gives them a means of explaining the world without God, and to even posit to the contrary is unacceptable because we can't even allow the possibility of God being part of this world. Why? Because if God is part of this world, then I have to change the way I live. We would be foolish and naive to think that people are so honest with themselves and so honest about their belief systems and so unbiased that they're willing to go wherever the evidence leads them when they know that evidence leading to a certain thing will require them to believe certain things. We can't be so naive, folks. We have to understand the way the world works. In fact, one man famously said, assessing the evidence, he famously said that as a presupposition, we cannot allow the possibility of the existence of God as a factor in these issues because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. That's what he said. And this was a non-Christian. Okay. So it's important to remember these things when we think about these issues. So, in conclusion, ideas have consequences. And what you believe about origins determines how you answer the other important questions in life. And I just want to say this. If the story that we receive from the scientific elite is true, then life has no meaning. And we are cosmic accidents that came from nothing, that are going to nothing, and every sense of love and joy and hope and meaning and morality is just an illusion. And there are scientists who I read just this week, I believe it was. He was a scientist, and he said, in the lab I believe one thing, and then when I get home I believe something else. That's what he said. Why? Because what he experienced personally told one thing with his family, and what he experienced in the lab, he believed told him something different, and he could not reconcile the two, so he's doomed to live a life of inconsistency. And I just want to say God calls us to more than that. The Bible says that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that you were made by God for God. In his infinite, beautiful wisdom, designing intricate details of the cell that we wouldn't discover till thousands of years inside human history. And when we saw it, we would say, wow, what a brilliant God. And he has made us in his image with inherent worth and inviolable dignity that is truly there and just not just a figment of our imagination. What we believe matters. And in the end, we want to think critically, we want to wrestle deeply, we want to be reasonable. We want to not ignore our bias, but we want to understand that everyone has bias, and that way we can understand the view, the ways in which we approach things. And above all, we want to interpret all things through the lens of Scripture. Why? Because God has spoken. We were not there millions of years ago, but someone was. And he has spoken.